I have the honor of introducing Dr. Jackie Leighton. She has been in the news with us the last little while, providing insights, advice, and knowledge about how to get your children through this really difficult time of COVID and how to cope. So, Dr. Leighton is a registered psychologist and professor in school and clinical child psychology at the University of Alberta. She earned her doctorate in 1999 and acquired postdoctoral training in 2001 at the University of Alberta and Yale University, respectively. She has been investigating children's development, learning, and achievement for nearly 30 years. Her research interests include understanding the mental models children form about new learning situations, clinical interviewing for test development and validation, and the social and emotional triggers of poor assessment performance, as well as instructional methods for enhancing formative feedback for students. She has published numerous articles on measurements and assessment journals, and she's written several books published by the Cambridge University Press and the Oxford University Press. So Dr. Leighton has requested to provide a little bit of a session on her research, first of all, and she's asked to keep most of the session today for you to ask questions. So there's going to be a lot of time for questions and answers later on. So in the meantime, I'm turning it over to you, Dr. Leighton.
Thank you, Anastasia, and I'm hoping everybody can hear me. And it is really a delight for me to be here. I wish I could see you all in person, but I want to thank you for joining us here today. And this is really an unprecedented time. And what I'm going to be doing today is that I mostly want to hear from you. And I think having a conversation for all of us. We're not actually a large group, we're about 20. So I think that we can actually do that very well. But before we start with questions, I just want to set the stage. So I'm going to be presenting a couple of slides just to give you some context for the way that we might begin to frame the conversation today. So I'm going to be sharing my screen right now. Okay, if I could. So it's, I'm unable, it says host disabled screen sharing. So I'm just wondering if I may be able to share my screen. Oh, here we go. Perfect. All right. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so why don't we start? So obviously the topic for today is going to be helping children, but also ourselves get through the COVID-19 lockdown. Because for many of you, it's not just about the kids that you might be thinking of, but it's also about ourselves because we're all affected. And so one of the things that before we launch into this, it is important that given the topic that we're going to be discussing, that I'm going to be presenting to you a variety of information based on psychological science and evidence. This is based on studies of children's development, adolescent development, but also in addition, anxiety and other emotional responses that can come to the surface during difficult times of crisis. However, this is not therapy, not that any of you think that it is, but I need to just be very clear that I cannot provide diagnoses or treatment or any other kind of clinical opinion that might require much more data and knowledge of specific situations. So I will, yes, be able to speculate, given the questions that you asked me, on the best response that I can provide, based also on my academic and also my research experience. But any kind of more specific direction I would not venture to do, and I can happily direct you to places where you might be able to get additional information and where you might be able to get much more direct intervention or advice on a specific situation. And I have here some phone numbers that I think are very useful at a time like this. This is the mental health helpline, which is toll-free, and the kids help phone, which is also toll-free, and of course 911 if there is any kind of immediate danger or urgent situation, which it's important to note that in these times, there are a number of immediate dangers in situations where people are feeling a certain amount of emotional distress. Okay, so I think that this is really why we are here and why this is an important conversation. So I want to begin by talking about fear, and the fear that a crisis like COVID ushers in. So we went from hearing that there might be a virus to, from essentially almost one day to the next, being in lockdown. Schools are closed, universities are closed, everybody stays home, restaurants are closed, and kids are seeing all of this. You are adults, we're seeing all of this, and we're trying to make sense of it. And in addition to trying to make sense of a very complex medical situation, a health crisis, we're also trying to make sense of a lot of feelings and emotions that are surfacing in us that we frankly may not be able to explain. And it's difficult for us to make sense or try and make ourselves feel better when we may not be able to fully understand the situation. So we are relying on media, we're relying on different sources of information to be able to help us with this information. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're able to fully put it together or understand exactly what we should be doing in these moments, in these times. And for children, they are going to be having a lot of questions that you as parents, that you as guardians may not be able to answer. Now, the reason that I came back to this slide before moving on to the next one is that in addition to a lot of the information that right now we're seeing about COVID, there are a lot of really scary images about gear that people have to wear in order to protect themselves and others. And if you have had, as I'm sure you all have had experience just going out of the house, there's a lot of tension out there if you go to the grocery store in terms of social distancing and wearing masks and being asked to sanitize your hands. So there's a lot of scariness around this, and I will tell you that I don't think the media has done the best job in terms of really tempering down the amount of fear that it's propagating. And so we are watching all this, kids are watching all this, and we're all trying to make sense of it, kids especially. So what happens as we try and understand like some pretty severe things that have been going on in the past 9 weeks, we're seeing a lot of stress. Naturally, there's going to be natural. I mean, it's bound to happen, given that our schedules and our life, as we have known it, has been radically changed. Many of you are right now dealing with kids at home. Kids are wanting to go back to school, and there are many people who are unemployed. They've lost their work. There are many more calls to mental health helplines in Alberta due to COVID-19, and this is a silent aspect of this pandemic that is affecting many people. It's affecting not just kids, it's affecting adults. So where does the fear and stress come from? Well, it's when we are constantly, and we rely on headlines, we rely on information, we rely on the media to help us understand, as I mentioned very early on, what might be going on. We are being fed a very steady diet, not just of the science or what they know to be the science of COVID-19, but also a lot of the interpretation and a lot of the fear-mongering associated with how we're supposed to act, what might happen, what the numbers are. Many of us don't even, to be fair, and there are a number of articles about this, the numbers haven't been placed in appropriate context. And so a lot of this is creating a lot of stress and a lot of fear. Okay, we then, what we experience is something called emotional contagion, which is that we're feeling fearful, we're feeling anxious, we're feeling stressed. And without even knowing it, our behaviors begin to change, and we can begin to, it begins to influence the way we treat our kids, our family members, our neighbors, the way that we walk into a grocery store, how spooked we feel if somebody gets too close, and we don't want to get too close to others because we don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, we're in this constant state of alertness and a great deal of stress because we are so aware of this new very heightened situation where not only do we not want to get sick, but we don't want to make anybody else sick, but at the same time, we realize that there are certain needs that we have, psychological, mental health needs that we have to be able to just conduct our lives. So the responsibility of how we respond to this public health becomes not just a matter of following the prescriptions or the guidelines from health authorities, but it also requires something else, which is actually a real heavy emotional lift for all of us. It requires for us to be able to engage with ourselves and really check in with our own level of personal wellness. Do we have fears? Are we finding ourselves much more anxious? Are we trying to relieve some of our stress in ways that we wouldn't have in the past? For example, in the news, there are many more people drinking more than they would because of a sense of wanting to ease their sense of isolation, but also their angst. And so this is actually a very interesting graphic, and for some of you, you might realize that it's actually showing this progression of thinking about big issues. And usually when we think about big issues, for example, in this case, a pandemic, we have to balance a number of values. Right now, the values that we have that we're balancing are A, public health, and wanting to follow the guidelines that we have been told that are necessary in order to flatten the curve and be able to maintain a certain level of health for the broad society. But also the other value is psychological wellness and realizing that we need to also be in touch with other people. Our kids need to go to school. They need to be in touch with their friends, and also trying to balance the two. The thing that I want to point out here is that, can you see my cursor moving? Okay, good. All right. So at the very bottom, we have a way of thinking about some crises, dilemmas, we could say, at a very basic level, like just following rules and just ignoring any other issues that might be going on. But this is actually not helpful. It's not helpful because just to follow rules and to ignore everything else might actually miss out important other variables like psychological wellness that need to be taken into account in the way that we respond. And so the more we move up the ladder to considering not just laws and order, but also considering social empathy for ourselves and for others, we need to move further beyond just what are the rules and to begin to think about the best way to respond to some of these crises in a way that not only maintain public health, but also in your own specific situations, your own personal wellness, your children's wellness, and the mental health wellness of those who might be around you. So there is a great website called Children First Canada that really emphasizes that in this time of the pandemic, the kids are not all right. To say that, well, we all have to lock down, we all have to just do what we're told, is true in a way, but there are consequences to this. And this is why it is very important that we sit down with kids as much as we can and explain the situation and understand from their perspective that the concerns and issues that they might be coming to us with are legit. They would like to get back to normal. They would like to be able to return to school. And so as a parent, as somebody who is taking care of kids, we need to be able to follow public health guidelines, but also use common sense when we're explaining and doing things with our kids, because kids are watching, and what we do will impact the way that they begin to think about this crisis and the way that they act. Parents are the #1 modelers of behavior and of ways of thinking about a variety of things in front of children, and so your actions become critical. So we have to explain why guidelines are offered and make comparisons in some cases with older kids, especially if they have questions and especially if they're fearful about the kinds of risks that this health crisis poses in relation to maybe other types of crises, so that they can have a better understanding about why we are all under lockdown, or why we don't need to be in some cases as scared, even though we're following guidelines, as what the media might suggest. So that's all about physical protection, but psychologically, we also need to be able to sit down with kids and talk about what they're afraid of, what they're worried about, explaining the way that the media can amplify some of these concerns and some of these fears, and how, in fact, if we go to the websites where the numbers associated with what might be going on are listed, that we can really begin to gain some perspective on the magnitude, but also the risk of the disease, and why in some cases there's actually not that much cause to worry. And also discussing the challenges that some of the requests for homeschooling and doing a lot of what children would normally be doing at school, doing it from home, discussing how difficult that will be, how it can look differently, why we need to stay motivated, and also finding ways to recognize the importance of gratitude when we do get out of this lockdown and we are able to go back to school and visit friends and get back to a life that is going to be normal, and yet really appreciating the lessons that this very unfortunate health crisis has introduced for us. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there for right now, and maybe take some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's good. All right. So I will take questions.
Okay, I'm going to click on my little participants list here to see if I see any hands up. If I don't see any hands up yet, I'm going to start asking questions that we took from registration. So one of the ones I had from the registration is talking about again, with the fear situation and the anxiety, that some kids are starting to demonstrate some aggression and in some cases regression. So whether they're hitting their little brother or biting their little sister or big sister, one person said that their child is regressing and that they've had some like physical accidents, like they're peeing on the floor again, things like that, and they just can't stop crying. They're just constantly fearful. So how do we handle something like that, Dr. Leighton?
Well, so first of all, it's very natural behavior for kids. They're going to be afraid. As I mentioned, when you wake up in the morning and you look at the headlines, your kids might not be actually reading the headlines, but it doesn't really take very much to be quite aware of how much concern there is about what is going on. And so if kids are afraid, and especially if they also see mom and dad be afraid, if mom and dad have lost their job, if mom and dad the kids can see mom and dad worried about what the future holds. Children are in a very vulnerable position. They rely on parents and the predictability of their environment to have a sense of safety. If they see that safety is in any way undermined because of what might be going on, because children will be able to pick up even the way that parents look at one another, if they're concerned, if there is a lot of tension or stress in the home, children are going to begin to internalize that. And if there is no room to begin to talk about the fear, or for parents to ease the concern that children have, that energy, that fear, that emotion that is building up in a child, if they're not able to actually talk about it, it will get channeled into a different mode of expression. It'll get channeled into aggression. They will be, fear and anger are very common sides, are two sides of a very similar coin. So the fear can get projected outward in a way to release that emotion, or it can be projected inward and internalized. For very young children, they might regress because they're not feeling safe, they're not feeling comfortable, and it might be a way that they begin to call for attention from a parent to be able to sit down and make them feel safe again.
Okay. Good, thank you. We have a question from Anna. I hope did I unmute them? Unmute. Come on.
Hear me? Hello?
Yeah, Anna, go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much for doing this talk. I have a 2-year and 7-month-old daughter, and she doesn't seem to understand, of course, the concept of a virus. So my first question is, how can we explain to young children a little bit what's going on without causing too much anxiety or stress? And then the second question is, she seems to be behaving normally. So I have not identified much anxiety or worried. It's just she realizes everything is closed. So I don't know if I should be exploring more her anxiety or anything I should be aware of and monitoring. Thank you.
Yeah, so so first of all, it's great that, is it your daughter?
Yes, my daughter, yes.
Your daughter. So it's great that your daughter isn't showing any signs of anxiety. And frankly, that is an important part. And that it's not, all kids are not going to show anxiety. That's really important to say. It's the anxiety only comes when there is a great deal of concern, either on the part of the child or the parent, about the unpredictability of the current situation. Anxiety usually means that we are upset about things that we cannot control, and we're worried. If you're not seeing it, then whatever it is that you're doing, whatever's going on in her environment, is actually not creating anxiety. So that's very good. Now, in terms of explaining to your daughter about what the virus is, you're quite right that for such a young little girl, she's not going to be able to understand that a virus can, is a microbe that can be, infected, etc. But what she can understand is that some things can hurt, and we need to take care to protect ourselves and protect others, because sometimes hurt, like a hurt arm, or you have a boo-boo on your hand, or she knows, she will observe that. She will have moments when she's crying and she doesn't feel so good. And you can begin to explain the costs of the virus in terms of the behaviors that we need to engage in, as a way to keep as many people well without boo-boos as much as possible, because there are some ways of hurting that can be spread. Now, that is something that if she won't need much more than that, if you're able to present that information in a way that she can sort of make sense of, okay, well, I've experienced some hurt, I've fallen down, or whatever it might be, and I know that sometimes I have to do things to protect myself, and to be able to extend that to the way that it is explained in relation to other people can be helpful.
Can I ask you, because what I have, I try to explain it to her in a way, like about something that she gets upset. She doesn't like to be dirty or dirty places.
Right.
So the way I explain to her why things are closed is like, they are dirty, they are cleaning them. Every time we go out, we need to clean our hands. And of course, now she thinks everyone's houses are dirty, and, which is quite funny, but that seems to work for her. I am not sure if I am actually damaging a little bit her with so much dirt around. I don't know, like I don't think that analogy is good or bad.
Right. So what's really interesting is that the way that you can actually talk to kids about a variety of issues, and what's really much more important than the nature of what it is that is being talked about, like dirt or disease or whatever, or even death, it's the way that it is talked about. So a child will really look to you to determine whether or not they should be panicking, or whether this is something that can be sort of processed in a way that, yes, it makes sense. This is what happened. So for example, We all have experienced a situation where a 2 or 3-year-old will be playing and then falls and will get up and look around to figure out how they're supposed to be responding. Should they cry? Should they continue playing, or what? The way that we talk to children about concerning things will determine, in large measure, unless there's a predisposition, congenitally for anxiety, the way that we talk and the way that we contextualize issues for kids, it is going to impact the way that they receive it. So to your point, you're saying, well, a lot of these places are closed because they're dirty. So we need them to be clean before we can go back in. You know what I would add? I would say that dirt generally isn't necessarily always a bad thing. Like, everything is going to be a little dirty because you can't expect 100% cleanliness, right? But these places just needed a little bit of extra time cleaning their tables and their floors. And as soon as they are able to sort of get a little bit cleaner, they're going to reopen and we can go back. So the thing that I would emphasize, because I think it's a great way, if it's working for your daughter, that's wonderful. What I would emphasize, though, is that dirt in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's just part of life. We are all going to come into contact with dirt.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay, I have a question from Viv, and it's to do with, this pandemic might be here for a while, and given that we still have to socially distance, kids can't see their friends, their grandparents, etc., what advice would you have for making this sustainable in terms of keeping children emotionally healthy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think this is sustainable. Just to continue with full-on social distancing, I don't think is, especially not if we want to ensure that kids are able to develop as socially and emotionally well as possible. So right now we are seeing some loosening of these restrictions. I am really glad to see this, because we need, as parents, as individuals, as social animals, we need some of these restrictions to loosen up. I would say apply a little common sense here in terms of, if your child wants to go see a friend, and both you and the other family is okay with having them come together, again, if they're able to play, if the alternative is too difficult for your child to not see his friend or her friend, whatever the situation might be, I would venture to say that they need the stimulation, they need the contact. Zoom and other modes of connection are not enough. Kids need to play. Kids need to play with one another, and they need to see people they love. And so in that way, I think that the recommendations have to be taken seriously, of course, but there's also has to be an amount of judgment on the part of parents and also your family, to be able to also keep your family well and healthy.
Yeah, I find that balance is quite difficult to be straight, because obviously there's the health issues now, like we are knowing more and more about the virus, and it can present differently. Even in kids, they are fighting this new inflammatory disease that's associated. And I just can't imagine how, even if school reopens in September, how are they going to play in the playground without, because there's asymptomatic carriers as well. So that's why it's so difficult. This virus is so difficult. The symptoms are so non-specific. And with the reopening, I can imagine it like reopens and then locked down again, and reopens until the caseload may be approaching to overwhelming the health system, and then they may have to lock down again. So then, so I just find it quite difficult to envision how they're gonna even have class, like what the classroom is gonna look like, and the playground.
Well, that is, that's kind of the $1,000,000 question, right? Right now, how do we go back to living a life that, it's not just, by the way, it's not like when we talk about getting together, schools and people working, it's not something like, well, gee, that's just something that we have thought up uniquely here in Canada or somewhere else. This is the human condition, right? Human beings interact. Human beings are close to each other. Human beings need each other. And so the question that we have to really grapple with are the risks of becoming ill, right? The risks of infection versus the real need to be able to carry on as human beings who connect and who work together, and for children to play and to develop. So to your point, we need to have schools open. Like, that's what I would say. We need to have schools open. We need to understand, either through increased testing or however medical officials decide to do this, we need a strategy that allows children to be able to go back to being children, and for others to go back to being, to lead normal lives. Because the alternative is actually going to potentially be worse. I mean, we cannot shield children from doing what they normally will need, what they need to do to be able to develop socially, emotionally, cognitively. And so to your point about, I don't know what this might look like, I don't know, but we are very innovative individuals. We can find ways, first of all, of making sense of the risks. Keep in mind that the risk to children, from the things that I have read, I'm not suggesting that kids are not able to get this virus, but from what I've read from medical officials, the rate of infection is lower among children, but also that the risks are very small compared to many other risks that children will have to face, such as accidents and other types of diseases, childhood diseases that they might face. So I think that one of the things that we might need as a society to do is to better understand what the risks are, to be able to comfortably go back to normal, understanding that in life there are a variety of risks that we just have to be prepared for.
Great, thank you very much for that question. I've got a few questions here, so I'm going to read off another one. This is Laura, who says, how do we help our teenagers navigate this? They're missing their friends, they're missing big, huge events like graduation, sports, everything, and really important time at school. And of course, for some of them that are just starting post-secondary next year, they were all excited to come on campuses and such. That's been taken away as well. So how do we help our teenagers and our older children get through this as well?
Well, that's another great question. And this is really a balancing act. How much do your kids, and really how much for each of us, how much do we need to see someone or be in touch with someone or be close to someone that we love? Like, for example, I know friends who would like to see their parents, kids obviously who want to see their friends. How much of a distress are they showing by not being able to do some of these things? Because this is the balancing act. If at all possible, we know that the recommendation is to stay put, stay home, social distance, do Zoom. But that has to be weighed against the consequence of getting really depressed, getting really anxious, getting so down on something that it begins to affect your functioning. So, can you, for example, as a parent, suggest, okay, you can't do sports, you might not be able to do prom, but go bike riding with your friend, right? You can maintain some social distance. Get together, but you don't have to be super close. Maybe you need to be able to see each other face to face, but it can at least be in person. There is something very important about being able to be in the same space as someone else without having to talk through a computer. And The other thing too, and I have to say, I cannot, as a psychologist, I cannot imagine how these lockdown measures persist into like the next 6 months. It is just unsustainable for individuals to be in perpetual isolation mode. It is just not something that we as human beings are accustomed to. And not just that, we are not wired to be in social isolation. And so to your point, and I think somebody else mentioned this, there has to be a new strategy from the medical community, government. It might be more risk-based. That's something that I've read about. It might be really targeting the most vulnerable and doing much more testing to see who really is at greatest risk. But we can't just have a strategy that essentially peels away and squashes everything that we are wired to do with others.
Yep, that's fair. Thank you very much for that answer. I have another question here from a parent. She's got a really rambunctious household right now, so she put it on email for us. She says, we talked a little bit about anxiety before in terms of the concept of anxiety. Her daughter is 3.5 and definitely exhibiting some anxiety behaviors. She's wondering what is the best way to try to talk to her about anxiety. How is she feeling about the sickness, as she calls it? Not just anxiety as a whole, but how do you talk to the child to have them express what that anxiety is like for them?
Yeah, and so children, it would surprise me if a child spoke about anxiety. The child will probably speak about fear. They're afraid, right? They're afraid about the sickness. They're afraid of mom and dad getting sick. They're afraid of not having mom and dad. They're afraid of the things that that are going on, because they're probably seeing mom and dad really upset as well. And so the way to begin, and this is what's really hard, the way to begin to talk to kids about the fear, the anxiety, begins with also you as the parent. What are your fears? What are your anxieties, right? And making sure that you can be calm and you can sort of have some perspective on the way that this health crisis is unfolding. And then when you talk to your very young child, to say that it is going to be okay, that it's okay to be afraid, that you're not going to be going anywhere, that the thing that you want to do is to establish a sense of safety for the child to be able to express the fear, but also to be consoled that the fear is understandable, but also that nothing bad is going to happen. And this is where we need, as adults, to be very clear of the way that we ourselves are exhibiting the stress and anxiety, because I will say this again, children are very unlikely to be really, really stressed out if they're not seeing mom and dad stressed out, right? They get their cues first and foremost from mom and dad or from caregivers, right? So talk to children about fear. It's okay. It's something that they are, if they want to talk about it, great. I mean, if they don't, I wouldn't necessarily impose it upon them, obviously. But if they want to talk about it, if you're seeing that your child is upset, is aggravated, talk to the child about the fear. And you might say, I'm a little bit afraid too, but this is how I know that we don't have anything to worry about. And help the child understand that nothing has really changed except that everybody's at home, things are closed, things are going to go back to normal. These are the things that we are keeping up, and try as much as possible to maintain a schedule and a structured environment. And kids will adapt to the new normal that you set up for them. Right? Again, they're going to be looking to you for the best way to react to that environment.
Okay, good. There was a hand up at one point from somebody named Luo. I don't know if your question was answered because the hand went down. Luo, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I just have a question about like his anger, and he's watching the video. It's called SMG4. I heard that the video has some like swearing words, F words, and then now he applied these words to me, and when he's easy to get upset now, and when he's upset, he's saying these words to me. So I try to calm him down. I try to accept his feelings, but in the other way, I think, do I also need to say like the consequences if they hate these words? How can I, stop him to say the words, and especially with telling him timing?
Okay, so is this related to at all the fear of COVID or concern about COVID, or this is just something about watching a video, and if I understood correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, watching a video, hearing bad words, and then using those bad words against you?
I think using bad words against me.
Okay, and obviously you're not at all happy with this. So, I mean, how old is the child?
10 years old,
10 years.
grade 4, yeah,
Okay.
a boy.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things as a 10-year-old, I would sit down and have a conversation with him about why it is that he's using those words when he knows that they're not words that should be used with a parent, right? He might be angry with you. He might want to be trying to get your attention. Obviously he has, because you are concerned about this.
Right.
And in trying to figure out, in trying to learn from your son, whether he is upset with you and he's using these words, you might be able to then get to the root of why it is that he's trying to get your attention, right? In the absence of that, one way is to ask him after that has not, if that has not worked because you've asked him not to use those words and he continues, the other thing is to take away, say, there are consequences to actions, right? So if you keep on using these words with me, I will need to take away something that you enjoy doing because I need you to understand that this is not appropriate behavior, right? So what you want to do is make sure that you do not reinforce the bad behavior of your son using these words, right? And that you take away something that is that he might find really enjoyable, so that he understands that the use of these words can have consequences, especially given that you've already had the conversation with him to not use these words. Is that something that you can see yourself doing?
Yes, I think I use the consequences. For example, I said I take your true quota away from you using the screen time.
The screen time, yeah.
Yeah.
Losing screen time. But I would only do that after trying to talk to him and trying to find out why he's using those words with you when he should know better, right? So he's probably trying to get your attention. He might be angry with you about something, and being able to get to the root of that would be very helpful.
And when he's angry, he's yelling, do you think I should say, I'm hearing you look upset? Mom is carrying me right now. Do you think I should say this way, or do you think I should walk away? Don't give him attention?
No, I think that, people, that's I'm really glad you raised this, because often people think that just paying attention or listening is giving someone attention. That's not necessarily the case. Attention is when let's say the child uses bad language and you get really upset and you say something to him, okay? And so now you have this dynamic where you're both interacting, but it's actually not the most constructive interaction at all. What you want to do with your attention is not just reinforce the behavior, but try and get to the root of it, right? And by that I mean that you sit down and you say, very explicitly, I need you to stop using these words when you talk to me, and this is why, and do you know why you shouldn't be using these words? Tell me why it is that you are, because you know better, right? And so at that point, that attention is actually being directed at trying to get to the root of why he might be angry with you, and that he's trying to get your attention by using these words. Now, if that leads nowhere and you're not able to find out the root cause, then what I would say is that every time he uses those words, don't react, don't overreact, just he loses screen time.
So that's another good question to lead into, Dr. Leighton, is along that same vein. I think the reason that Louis asked about that is because, of course, right now, while people are at home and they're doing a lot of screen work, both for school and as well as just keeping them occupied and distracted, at what point does the tech become intrusive? Like, is there going to be any long-term impacts? Is one of the questions we had from our pre-registration. Is there going to be long-term impacts of our kids having so much screen time at this point? And then how do we roll that back when this is all over?
So this is why I think that this is unsustainable. We actually do not know what the long-term impacts are of all this screen time, of just staying locked down, of all this social isolation. We do know that calls to mental health lines are up. We do know that child abuse is up. We know that domestic violence is up. We know that suicides are up. So this is why I do not think this is sustainable. I think all we can do is do the best we can to take care of our immediate environment, doing the best we can, obviously, given that children have to be right now learning through technology because schools are closed. But this is not something that can be sustained long term. So to the question that was asked, do we know what the ramifications for all of this are? No, we don't. Are we afraid of what those might be? Yes. And that is why I think that increasingly you are seeing more articles, more calls to government and medical health officials that we need a strategy that preserves safety, but it has to be a more sophisticated strategy, not one that just simply says, everyone stay in isolation, because it is bound to be unhealthy in the short term because of all the increases in mental health outreach. And the long term, we have no idea.
Yeah, okay. Just coming back to your slides, there's a parent who's asking if you can repeat the website, please, of where you can find a lot of information. I think it was called Children First.
Yeah, very, very good. And in fact, what I might do here really quickly is I would like to share with you the website. If I may, can I share my screen again?
Yep, Darlene can do that for you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna share with you can you all see it?
Yes, Children First Canada, yes.
Children First Canada. If you go here, there are a number of excellent resources for helping children during this crisis. Also, you will see, so there are resources for educators, there are resources for parents. Also, you will see that Children First Canada, which is a nonprofit organization really that advocates for children, they have written letters to government to not only push for more funding for the Kids Help Phone, but also better strategies for how this is rolling out for children. These folks know, as well as many psychologists, that home is not the safest place for many kids, especially if there is violence or there are mental health issues in the home. And so this is a website that you can go to, not just to learn more about ways to help your children and yourself during these times, but also to learn that this is actually not a sustainable approach long-term for kids. Schools have to open. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah. Now we're getting closer. We got 5 more minutes. I've got one question from a parent on general schooling. What will the future of formative education look like post-COVID? And do you see a hybrid model for schooling for K-12?
And by a hybrid, like in class and then online?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what they meant. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that education is best done face-to-face, especially for very young children. The older students become, certainly at post-secondary, there's a lot that can be done online. But children, first of all, need other children. They need to socialize with other children. They need a lot of tactile and face-to-face contact. And they need to be stimulated by people, by situations, by moving in the environment. And so I do not see the future of education for certainly primary grades to involve a hybrid. I think that the face-to-face education is not just enjoyable for children. I think that for social and emotional and cognitive development, it is a requirement. As children get older, I think there are going to be many more options. Certainly junior high and high school, depending on the level of maturity of the child and also the self-regulation and self-directedness of the child, online education, I think, could be very successful. But it really does depend on the child and how much social contact they need with teachers in terms of scaffolding and work being done in proximity, but also the very valuable social aspects of being able to be discussing things in a group. And so again, it really is a matter of the maturity of the child and also the discipline that is actually being considered. I can tell you this, even post-secondary students, because I teach large classes and I had to teach them online, they want face-to-face because there is something very important about being in a room. You have an experience, you're able to see each other and facial expressions. This is part of how we communicate.
Right. Okay. So I've got two questions that are kind of dovetailing on each other. So that's probably the last question. So Laura asked, what about the kids and the teens that are immunization compromised for school? And then Viv said, then do you think children sitting in rows or having plexiglass in the classroom is a solution? So how do we keep them safe while they're in school then in that case?
Well, I think for right now, those children who are, I would consider them most vulnerable, their safety is number one. So for those kids, I think having some kind of special setup at home or in some other in some other building or classroom where they can be kept at greater distance will be necessary for physical health first. However, hopefully that is something that is short-term. And for those children who have compromised immune systems, there will be a therapy or vaccine that will be introduced so that those children are able to, at a point in the near future, join other classes with all their classmates, because those children should not be deprived from the social interaction that is so necessary for human development to be able to proceed as strongly and as successfully as possible.
Right. Thank you very much. So we got 1 minute left. Is there anybody that has a burning question for Dr. Leighton? Any last question? Oh, I've got one from Kelly. Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Hi, I was just wondering, Dr. Leighton, if you had any advice for those of us with very curious and inquisitive children who want to know details, but know, like details specifically, I guess, about the pandemic, but know that it's going to upset them, or that, you know, when they find out things, they get upset. Is there a way that we can inform curious kids without upsetting them further, I guess?
Possibly not, actually. So that's the honest answer. So you know what I would do? I would say, you know, how about we look at some of this together, and the moment you start getting upset, why don't we stop? And we can talk about why you're upset. So introduce, so for example, I don't know how old your child is, but perhaps there's all this information online. Sitting down with your child, going through perhaps, let's say they're really interested in the numbers. There's so many numbers out there. Going through the numbers of of the cases, of the infections, of the death rates, etc., and see how your child is reacting as you go through it. And if you can feel like They are getting tense, nervous. They start asking you a lot of questions. Check in with the child. Say, do you want us to stop? Do you want to talk about this? So I would use the child as I would gauge advancing from your child's behavior. And so you want to be open. Being open is really important for children. You don't want to suggest that this is somehow not good to know, or that there's something scary out there. You want to be open. And if your child is curious, I would certainly feed that curiosity. Curiosity is wonderful in children. But also, if they're getting upset, it's also okay to be upset. We all get upset, and then you can stop.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much. So with that, we have time we spent together. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much. So Dr. Leighton, thank you for taking.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. These are great questions, and I wish you all the very best, and stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you for taking all of our questions and taking time with us today. We've always appreciated your knowledge and your advice and your engagement with the community. So our gratitude to you. I'd also like to thank the facilitators that worked with me today to make this happen. So Darlene, Emily, Chrisanne in the background, helping me sift through the questions, watching for the hands up, making sure the microphones and screens work. Thank you so very much. You guys did a really great job. And then most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Again, this is our learning journey through technology as well, and doing this differently. I appreciate that you have taken the time to be with us today, asking the great questions, and I invite you to continue watching the U of A website so we can have other series like these. And if there's questions, by all means, please send them my way, and we'll do the best we can to send them forward as necessary. And I wish you all a fantastic weekend. Thank you again for joining us.